Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Tom McSorley, Executive Director of the Canadian Film Institute, welcoming you to our 12th season of the Enlightened Screen, a series of artist talks with independent filmmakers from across Canada. In its previous years, the Enlightened Screen has featured such filmmakers as Catherine Martin, Ashley Mackenzie, William D. McGilvery, Brandon Cronenberg, Peter Mettler, Ingrid Veninger, Carl Basai, and many others. And for us, it's a very important way of audiences encountering the filmmakers and their work. Usually, of course, we do this Enlightened Screen series as a live event in our theater with the filmmaker present for introduction and a Q&A after the screening itself. Given that this is not the case yet, or I'm still not able to do that, we're honored to be able to bring to you a very talented young filmmaker, writer, director, Nicole Dorsey, whose first feature film, Black Conflux, played at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2019 before COVID hit. It was about to be released. In fact, we were going to try to show it at our first International Film Festival of Ottawa, but we had to cancel that one, of course, because of COVID-19. It is now, though, the film is now making some live screenings across the country and is playing in the digital TIFF Bell Lightbox. So you can get a chance to see it there if you don't have a chance to go to see it in the theaters. And so we're delighted to welcome Nicole to our series, our guest artist series, where she will talk, as you'll see, about making the film's origins, casting the film, and all of the other things that went into making this remarkable, very moving and very sophisticated first feature film that blends the stories of two characters who don't know each other and are different parts of their lives, but live in the same small town in Newfoundland in the mid-1980s. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Nicole Dorsey. She is, as I said, a very talented young filmmaker. We'll see more from her in the future, I have no doubt. And if you can, wherever you can, please find either streaming or at a theater somewhere, her feature film, Black Conflux. It's well worth your time. Thanks very much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. So welcome to Canadian Film Institute's The Enlightened Screen series, Nicole Dorsey. It's great to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's talk, before we talk about your remarkable first feature, Black Conflux, tell us how you began, or how you found your way into filmmaking and your very diverse career that you have already. How did that start for you?
Yeah, I guess there's a long and short answer, but I always wanted to be a filmmaker ever since I was a kid. So I came up in my teen years through photography, and I did a bit of videography, and theater was really big for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I went straight to film school. There wasn't really another path I wanted to try out. Yeah. And then started working in the industry. I knew I wanted to direct, but it was the path to doing that and having a career wasn't clear. And at that time, no one was really talking about women in film and the directing role.
Right,
so
right.
I worked in many other sort of realms. I was a camera assistant at one point. I worked in casting. I was a showrunner's assistant. Eventually I script supervised until I kept making short films.
Right.
I think at this point I've made like 12. And that landed me more so in the commercial realm, and I started directing those, but kept writing until I was able to get my feature off the ground.
Yeah, and you went to Ryerson, but we can still call that university.
Yeah.
I know, eh? A lot of famous alumni, filmmakers came from there, of course, Bruce McDonald and Peter Mettler and a bunch of others. So you're in a long tradition, I guess, of filmmakers who came out of that institution. So tell me, that's interested in what you were saying about you were always writing, because of course writing you could do with virtually no money. You can keep creating out of your imagination without having to mount a production. Tell me about the origin of Black Conflux, because I think it's so well written. I mean, I'm wondering when it started, how many iterations of the story did you go through before you put it before the camera. Tell us a bit about that process.
Yeah, it took a while. It definitely wasn't overnight. I knew I wanted to tell a story that, was maybe inspired by something I'd seen or heard about. And I was traveling in Newfoundland because I have family there back in 2010. And I heard about some things that happened in the 80s that caught my interest. But I became sort of obsessed with this idea of fate versus coincidence and how two people from seemingly different worlds come together. But I hadn't made something sort of more psychological, sort of a darker drama before. So it scared me a little bit. I'd done a lot of comedy and some drama up to that point. So I made a short film first. I had this feature idea, but I went back to Newfoundland in 2014. Actually, it was 2013. And then it came out in 2014. But I made a short film called Dennis, which just gave me the opportunity to test my hand at it. And after that, I think I developed the confidence to go forward, and I started working on the feature, which I wrote in 2015. So, and then we shot the film in 2018. So it took time, it took time to get there.
And did you, I'm not sure, I know a little bit about the process, but there are a number of readers that would give you advice, or the funders, would they give you advice on the shape of your story, or was it pretty much how you imagined it as a script when you finally got to shoot it? I mean that's a long period of 3 years between creation.
Yeah, well, I did a couple of things. I went to Vancouver and did the Women in the Director's Chair program. And that was very helpful because the female character, Jackie, I think was very underwritten when I first wrote her, because she's close to me in many ways. And I think I was, I don't know, scared to write her, or like feeling vulnerable, or I'm not even sure. Dennis was actually quite easy to write because he was so research based. Whereas Jackie was like personal experience based. And so going and doing that lab was really helpful in just drawing that character out. And again, I think just giving me confidence in myself. And then, I obviously have producers, and there's notes that happen with that. But I think I did have a unique experience with this project in terms of our funding, not playing a heavy creative hand. Telefilm really liked the idea of the film, and I guess trusted my vision, and we didn't really receive notes from them, which
that's great. Wow.
Yeah, it was very exciting, obviously, as a first-time filmmaker, to have the sort of license to go out and make your vision.
Yeah, and I think it's a fascinating film because it has, as you said earlier, the kind of the darker psychological dimensions to it. It sort of combines that with the coming of age, I guess, motif in Jackie's story. But I find it really an interesting blend of the world of Dennis, which is very tortured and very, he's struggling to figure himself out in a way that's different from Jackie, because he's an adult and she's 15. So that I thought that was a really original way to juxtapose the characters. And when you did Dennis the short, were you imagining a feature just about Dennis, or was it sort of you always had this young woman in mind?
Yeah, it was always two characters. It was always two that you watch equally the entire film. I think I focused on Dennis in the short mainly because I just wanted to explore him, because he felt distant from myself. And I guess I was playing around with how do you make a character like this watchable, to follow the whole way through. And he changed a lot from the short to the feature. I definitely learned new things about him, but also the conversations in the world changed. And thus I needed a character that functioned slightly differently.
Yeah. And I think your use of the fantasy sequences or the imaginary women in his life is a really interesting. And I'm curious about your own conjuring of Dennis's psychology in terms of his fear of women and his fear of himself and his fear of failure. I thought it was really, really richly drawn. You talk a bit about how when you're imagining a character who's kind of awkward and kind of maybe angry about something unspoken and directs it at women because he's afraid of them, or he's obviously attracted to them too, blah, blah, blah. How did that, that's a really interesting, because it almost comes out of, you're so surprised when he walks into the truck, for example, and you're like, what is that? Oh my God, this is a fantasy sequence. And it's unannounced, which is I love about it. And all the way through, even to the very end in the car with the women telling him he's no good before Jackie gets in. Yeah, talk a little bit about that's a really, I think, a really inventive way to make manifest his psychology and his fears.
Yeah, well, I thought a lot about, and particularly at that time in the 80s, I think there is a world in which we were told we were owed, especially for men. There was a certain privilege that you feel you need to be part of. And if you're not sort of succeeding at it, then you're a failure. And I think there's a lot of self-hatred in that. So in a way, these fantasies are Dennis's self-preservation. It's a world in which he can, in his own sort of subconscious, be the charming, affable man that he longs to be, and to sort of fit within this sort of standard society.
Right.
And as he's confronted continuously by the realities of his waking life, that sort of internal world starts to shift on him, because there is very much a self-loathing, I think, that takes place when you don't, as much as there's an outward loathing, I think there's very much an internal loathing with characters like Dennis. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll have to pick up on your point about the 80s. I found it fascinating, again, about the 1980s in Newfoundland in particular. And I think you're actually the newsreader in this sequence where you hear about the fishery. And this, to me, what's interesting is the context of these two characters is that, well, they seem to be from homes that are broken, or they're from, there's absent parents, or there's a lot of trauma within the family. And in the case of Jackie, her mother's in jail, and but just that sense, and in Newfoundland itself, that the fishery was in crisis, and so suddenly the whole society is on edge in a way. I mean, it's very subtle in terms of that news report, but I thought that was interesting because of Newfoundland's own history and people's experience of the economy, let's say, of that province at the time would have been a lot of stress going on in terms of, the future and this crisis in the fishery. So I thought that was really an interesting aspect. And when you were building the backdrop, as it were, for the setting, did you do a lot of research on Newfoundland itself, or was you say you have relatives from there? I guess you would have known these things already, but.
Yeah, I mean, there were some things that I knew, a bunch that I learned, a lot of research. One of my aunts, well, a couple of my aunts grew up in the 80s in Newfoundland, but I talked to one aunt in particular a lot about her experiences and what was going on at the time. And then even in 2010, I kept a lot of that information because I did hitchhike myself. I hitchhiked around the Irish Loop in Newfoundland and was collecting a bunch of information during that time. So I wanted to infuse the story, which is with as much as I could that grounded it, and little Easter eggs here and there.
Right.
But I mean, at the same time, I do think this story can take place kind of anywhere. Right. It works really well for Newfoundland because of the landscape. And I think the insular community lends itself to, especially why somebody like Dennis feels so isolated, or even Jackie, of why she feels so isolated. That's one thing both those characters very much have in common is a sense of loneliness.
Yes. Right.
So yeah. I try as much as I can to to throw as much in there as possible.
Right. Including April Wine and Gowan. And I read that wonderful, if you could retell it, I read it in the Globe and Mail, the article about your Moonlight Desires, the song that Dennis dances to in the club. You originally had another song by another band. Tell us a little that little story, because I think it worked out beautifully, as you said in the Globe and Mail piece.
Yeah, well, we recorded that scene, the big dancing number, to "It's a Sin" by the Pet Shop Boys, which I always had in mind. And I thought it worked perfectly. And then we took a risk because we were trying to lock down the rights beforehand, but we did take a risk and we shot it, and it's a 4-minute uncut oneer. So the song is it plays a big part in the scene. And yeah, we tried to get the rights, and the Pet Shop Boys would not give us the rights. And it wasn't a money thing, surprisingly. It was because they didn't want to be seen as an 80s band, which I kind of laughed about.
Yes,
because the film takes place in the 80s. So
yeah.
So I panicked, and my music supervisor was like, have you ever checked out Gowan? And I didn't have his sort of music at the top of my head or anything.
Right.
And I spent the evening going through all his albums, and then all of a sudden Moonlight Desires came on, and I just thought, oh my God, this song, everything about it. It was recorded in 1987, which is the year of the film. Lyrically, it just worked so well with this sort of like blossoming that Dennis is having in this moment. And so it was winter in Montreal when we were cutting, and the studio had closed, but I had an overnight key. So I ran in and I threw the track down on our timeline, and it worked perfectly. Wow. It was serendipitous, really. And to the point where, you're just going, oh, thank God the other song didn't work. Because I think now the amount of people who talk about that song in this film, it always comes up. It was very much meant to be.
Yeah, I can't imagine that scene with any other song. Like, it's literally, I know that's chicken and egg a little bit, but but it is, as you said, the lyric is so perfect for Dennis's condition. These moonlight desires, they haunt me. So that was a happy accident, I guess we could call that one.
Well, it's funny because and I don't think Gowan really it's funny because he was saying in his side of the interview, that wasn't the meaning he had intended when he wrote the song. So to hear it re-envisioned,
exactly,
he enjoyed it. But it worked well.
That's what art does. It rewrites things. And maybe a little bit about, I'd like to know about your two main actors, the casting of Ella and Ryan, because their performances are so different and so great individually. And that moment where they come together, we can assume everybody's seen the film who's watching this now. That extraordinary moment when they're, as you say, their lives, graze off each other. The dynamic in that car scene is amazing as well. So how did you find them? I mean, I guess is one question. And because, Ella Ballantyne's voice, her presence, her charisma is extraordinary, as is Ryan's as Dennis, because they're both really interesting roles and challenging ones for each actor, I would imagine. But please, how you found them?
Well, my producer actually mentioned Ella first. I think she had recently won a Canadian Screen Award for an Anna Green Gables movie, because she did a set of movies. And I saw her picture, and there was just something so captivating about her. But she was very much on this cusp, because she looked very young for a very long time. She looked like a little kid. And she was sort of blossoming in this moment, and was really looking to do something, just a bit more mature than maybe sort of the more youth-based projects she'd been working on. And just looking at her photo, I was just instantly intrigued by her. And so we reached out. No, did we even reach out, or did she go the opposite way? I can't even remember now. But either way, we ended up connecting, and then she came in as part of the audition process. And she wrote me a very sweet letter of how much she wanted this role. But I also kind of knew right away that she was right for it. And I did see a bunch of other amazing young actors. But again, it's just something that always brought me back to Ella. And then with Ryan, we had another actor in this role for a while, and things shifted because schedules shifted, and the timing didn't work out with that other actor. And I was about, what were we, maybe a couple weeks out from production. And I was pretty panicked. And, bless his agent, because normally I don't take super kindly on this, but I got a direct email from his agent that was like, I have the actor for you. Look no further. This is your guy. And normally I'm like, okay, get out of here. Like, sure he is. And then I looked at his tape, and I was like, well, geez, I mean, you can't really deny this audition tape at all. And again, we saw other actors. We looked everywhere. I had tapes in from Australia, Ireland, New York, LA, everywhere. And then, end up with Ryan, a Canadian originally from Vancouver. And he was so Dennis. He just embodied this character in a way I didn't see with other people, even though they were great actors. There was just something about Ryan for this role.
Well chosen, I have to say, in both cases. And how have you handled one other thing I want to know about those extraordinary images of the rivers, of the Black Conflux, that landscape. Where is that?
It's in Newfoundland, in this area. Well, I don't know if it's a town, because it's literally a dirt road with an ATV trail.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's called Nuggetville in Newfoundland. But there's no ville. It's just you're in the middle of the wilderness with a trail. I think our producer Mark O'Neill, because I was looking everywhere. I was basically on Google Maps for a while, being like, is there a Conflux anywhere here? And Mark O'Neill had, I think, pointed it out on a map. He had heard about it or something, but no one had been there. And then we spent one weekend in prep, literally trudging through the bush to get to this place. I was covered in bug bites all over my face. I think it took us like 2 hours or something to get in.
God,
but we emerged at this beautiful river.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it was so perfect. And when we brought the drone up to have a look at it from a distance, we were like, oh my goodness, like it couldn't be more perfect for this story. So we ended up finding this guy who lived off the grid in like a cabin out there.
Wow.
And Newfoundland is full of very wonderful people who just want to help and be part of things. So we ended up asking him if he'd help us come to shoot, if we paid him to use his ATV to get back out there with our drone. So that's how we found it.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's so striking a landscape. The closing moment, and it's all the way through. There's that that motif that you repeat. It's very moving in a way, that landscape. And yeah, it's just jaw dropping. So that's just where I had to know where it is, because it's beautiful. So I'm so thrilled that your film is finally in the world, because as we remember, we did our Canada Now thing in New York and then in Los Angeles right before everything shut down. And I don't know, have you been able to show the film in a theater anywhere?
Yeah, so we're in theaters. We did, I believe, a 2 week or maybe 3 week, maybe it was 2 week run in Newfoundland, in St. John's.
Oh, great.
We were in PEI, in Montreal, in another part of Quebec. Virtually, we've been at the Lightbox.
Right.
We did a run there. Opened in Winnipeg last weekend.
Fantastic.
And I believe Vancouver, Victoria, other parts. Ontario is just starting to open up now.
Right.
Yeah, so we will be theatrically in a few cities in Ontario as well. So
that's great.
It's finally living in the world.
In the world, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, COVID has done a lot of things, and that's certainly one of the most. I mean, for yes, virtual screenings are one thing, but your film, I think in particular, needs a big screen, because it's such an intimate film, and also just that, again, your use of landscape is, you want a big image and a big sound for that. So I guess the inevitable question now is, I know you shuttle between Toronto and Los Angeles, and you're busy working a lot, but what's next for you in terms of your next feature film project?
There's a couple things in the works, but there's a series that we're looking to shoot about a fencer that will be hopefully going into production this fall. And then another film that which is still kind of coming together and in the works, but that would shoot in Ireland. So always, working on things and getting projects off the ground. And I'm also still writing. So I'm both doing my own projects and coming on board for others that were not written by me.
Right. Well, that's great to hear that you're busy on your own stuff, and just busy, because we all need to make a living after all. So
yes, it's a game of spinning plates.
Exactly. Really. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being part of the Enlightened Screen, Nicole, and looking forward to our next conversation. I hope that's in person, wherever that might take place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.